Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and I'm your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I will be interviewing a number of amazing people and simply having a conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive in. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. You'll be able to catch up with all of the shows on iTunes, Spotify, and all of the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 8 with the title, How the Term Queer Became Cool Again. And I have the absolute honor and privilege to be joined by Joseph Galliano. I met Joe following an introduction from a mutual friend, Kate Bosworth, who was the CMO at M&C Saatchi. She thought we'd have loads to talk about, and we did. And I don't think we've stopped talking since. Joe is the co-founder and CEO of Queer Britain, a charity working to establish the first national LGBTQ+ museum. But he's been a journalist, editor of the Gay Times, a book editor, a third sector major donor fundraiser, an ambassador manager, and a senior corporate network leader. Surprised he has time to do anything else. And I asked Joe to describe his superpower, and he said, other people. So, hello, Joe. Welcome to the show.
Hello. I'm exhausted hearing that. I think I need to have a lie down.
Well, we'll have plenty of time for that later, I'm sure. So tell me, how did the term queer become cool again?
It's funny because we had quite a long discussion as an organisation about what we were going to call ourselves, which was, and that was always the hardest thing to do, really, in the early stages. And we really thought about what is it that young people in particular, how do they refer to themselves now? And what is also the most inclusive term under that big long acronym that rolls on and on. And queer was the only moniker under that acronym that actually everybody can stand underneath. So for us, it was about being as inclusive as possible. But also, I think it's that last little bit of reclaiming, because it's still problematic for a lot of people.
Yeah, of a certain generation, I know many people that when they hear that word, it sends shivers down their spine. It's been used as, they've heard it so many times as a word of abuse directed towards them. So I guess it's about time.
It's definitely been a stick to beat people. I think, and it has been used for a long time. I think right back to Lord Queensberry, Oscar Wilde's Bosie's father, Oscar Wilde's lover's father, who used queer in that pejorative sense. One of the things I thought was I certainly make absolutely no claim to having been key in disarming that word, but if you go back to the early 90s and you look at an organisation like a group like Queer Nation, which was a split off from the HIV/AIDS activist group ACT UP, and they obviously embraced the word queer as an act of radical defiance.
Yeah, I think the fact that most people now use LGBTQ+, the Q obviously being queer, it's gained acceptance and it's becoming normal conversation. It's part of the acronym, if you like, for anyone who doesn't identify either sexually or gender hetero or cisnormative, if you like. It's a term for anyone who wants to be or is just themselves. Yeah?
It's that kind of sexual and gender non-conforming. And I think it can be, there's a beautiful plasticity to it, that it can be embraced to mean what you want it to mean. And outside of kind of academic circles, I think that's what people do with it. And that's what I find most exciting about it.
Yeah, I'm quite comfortable describing myself as queer in a queer community around queer people. I think if someone, as you said, used it pejoratively or weaponized it against me, I would find it offensive. But as an I am moniker, it works quite well for me.
And that's about control and self-identification, isn't that?
Oh yeah, completely. Yeah.
Where does the power reside in the use of a word? If you can take it and use it for yourself, then and you can use it affectionately, then that is, you're holding that power. And I think that it comes back to exactly like you say there, the intent. Where is if there's violent intent, then actually you hear the violence rather than the word.
Yeah, I suppose you could use any word with violent intent, and it would sound violent. Flowers.
Don't you dare hit me with those flowers.
So yeah, you could with the right intent or the wrong intent, you can weaponize anything, I guess. So, as you say, by reclaiming the queer as an identity that I'm proud of. I own that, and I take the power back. So yeah, I completely understand that. And
this is why also, like, particularly for some older people in particular who have had it used against them as a slur. It can be hard for people to kind of step away from that pain, and which is tough.
Mm. So you had this crazy idea of co-founding the first LGBT museum in the UK, or fixed space LGBTQ plus museum is what is kind of. There's been many roaming ones, hasn't there? But this is kind of the first one you're aiming to have a fixed permanent home.
Yeah, I mean, there've been plenty of really good exhibitions and great community projects and so forth. This is the first, and actually not the first attempt to get a project like this up and running, but the first attempt for a while to establish a national bricks and mortar museum we'll also always do pop-ups around the country and so forth, but it feels like bricks and mortar is a really important thing in terms of the sort of symbolism of what does it mean in terms of how do we show as a country whose stories and artifacts we value, and how can we own them for ourselves as well?
So that was the why. That was the reason that you felt it was important to create this sort of snapshot, this storytelling, capturing the lives and the moments of people for future generations, queer and non-queer people.
Yeah, and actually, that's absolutely really vital. Is that we think of it as the LGBTQ plus museum for all, regardless of sexuality or gender identity. I keep coming back to it's the image. I know we've talked about this before, but it's the image of a young woman who's just come out to her mother and trying to create somewhere that they can both go to together, so they can both come away feeling excited to be a part of this set of communities and understanding their own family a lot better, and coming away just excited with the possibilities of the world and all it can offer.
So have you found it's been received by, A, I suppose the queer community, and B, by the non-queer community? Have you found there's a real kind of, we need this, or has it been a struggle?
No, I've been pushing against. It feels like I've been pushing against one open door after another. It feels like an idea whose time really has come. It's so funny, Joe, because I started off in some ways just sort of thinking like, what's the most exciting thing I could do right now, and I knew emotionally what it meant to me. I know emotionally what it would have meant to me to see myself better reflected in the culture. I hadn't somehow made that leap as to how that would feel for other people, and quite often I've been talking to people about what we're doing. And actually, strangely, in business meetings or in or with a community activist, or and you suddenly realise that they're talking to you, but there's a tear in it. They've kind of welled up, and I think the first few times that happened, that was a real signal for me that it was like, oh, okay, this is really important. This is something to be carried with a great sense of responsibility, and I feel very privileged to be able to do everything in my power to hold that and make that happen.
So I suppose in the same way that a church is not the building, it's the people. The Queer Museum effectively is the community, the people coming together, the memories it holds that you treasure beyond just the bricks and mortar.
Yes, yeah. Although I see the bricks and mortar being a very strong signal, and that's kind of creating the what would the right word be, the crucible for the beacon to be sitting in, so that can be then seen around the world, and so that people can see the value in these stories and understand why this is important, that this is important.
Sort of some sort of North Star shining light that everyone can focus on. And I get that. I mean, one of the things that I became, I suppose, aware of when I first met you, we started talking about this. It was just a conversation over a coffee in a cafe, effectively. I think then I came to some of the launch events and I met some of the other people who were involved with the project. And I think you hear so much from the community, or whatever the community is, the population of people who are queer, about negativity around business, around pinkwashing, around the government, MPs, Parliament, civil servants not representing or not considering queer people. But what I was struck by was the depth and breadth of people involved with the project, who are sponsoring it, who are promoting it, who are happy to stand shoulder to shoulder with the museum. From that launch at Dover House, the number of people there, and the Devonshire Club, the one there was such a number of diverse people from all over. Okay, maybe the privileged side of London. Maybe to be fair,
we started off with very much a focus on developing a donor community. So in those early days, that very much, there was definitely privilege in those rooms. But you need that to get things going.
But I felt it's being wielded for the benefit of the community. It wasn't privilege for privilege's sake. It's privilege using its privilege for amplification and to establish this and be a part of it.
Yeah,
and be proud. And to be proud. I mean, there's many people who are not proud to be openly queer, but in those rooms there were people who were prepared to be openly queer and back the project.
And what is wonderful is the amount of times, those people, they say, how can I help? And that, some of the most powerful 4 words you can hear, aren't they, really?
Yeah. Because that's a real powerful amount. I think last year there was that event that Coots organised in 440 Strand, wasn't there, where they had the massive rainbow stripes on the outside of their main office, their global flagship office in London.
I can't tell you how much that made me both sort of proud and give a wry smile. The fact that, the Coots had taken such a bold move to, and like, for what, it's a private bank, that's kind of a pretty conservative type of organisation, one would think. The Queen's Bank. And we've slapped the word queer on the front of it in one of the most high-profile locations in the country. And, you can talk about pinkwashing, and I don't think in that particular instance that was a demonstration of pinkwashing in the slightest. I think that was them, within that sector, a bit of bravery, actually.
It was. I worked for Coots in the 90s, and the whole place at 440 Strand was so controlled about who could be seen on the banking floor, which entrance you could come into, which escalated degrees of what you were allowed to wear as an employee.
Did they still have the frock coats?
They still have frock coats then, And they used to have that massive revolving tree in the foyer right on the ground floor, which is used to rotate once every 24 hours, really, really slowly.
I didn't know
that. You wouldn't notice because it rotated so slowly. Because obviously they wanted the tree to grow upwards, not twist and things into the sunlight. So they had to rotate it.
Fantastic.
And the massive koi carp pond in the middle. It was still there. Yeah. But I found it incredible. I mean, that night there were 100, 200 people in the foyer there.
Yeah, about 200
in a reception celebrating Pride, celebrating Coots' celebration of Pride with Queer Britain dead centre of that. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, and we've done other things with them as well. They've been sort of happy to introduce us to some of their clients. They've been happy to hosted us for a donor dinner, and actually just some of the staff there at the end of the phone when you need to talk things through.
Yeah. Mm. So we're now in June, aren't we? So this is 2nd of June 2020.
Is it June? I've lost track.
I know.
I actually Googled the day the other day. What day is it today?
It's funny. My wife and I had this routine when she was being furloughed. We lost track of days, so we got in the habit of waking up in the morning shouting out the day of the week it was, so we both remember what day of the week. And religiously, we always do pinch punch the first of the month. When we wake up in the morning, it's kind of like a commando assault on each other. The first one to get in wins. It's kind of like it's a ritual we've had for years. And sometimes it can get quite over the top. I wouldn't say violent, but certainly it gets a bit risky when we're sort of like leaping at each other. And I've got this app on my phone. I just realised that it's my lockdown effectively started on the 13th of March, and that's 11 weeks ago. And it's like, where's that time go, eh?
Yeah.
Where's that time go?
It's funny. I mean, how are you coping with it all? How are you?
Well, I've worked from home on and off for quite a while, and in the last couple of years, quite a bit. But I'd always intersperse working from home or working remotely with trips to London, trips to clients, delivering, traveling the world. So this is the first time I've been consciously at home so much. And occasionally I'll go a bit stir crazy. I need to get out. I realised that I haven't really been out much for 4 or 5 days. And even then it's just to put the bins out or have a quick look outside. So we're starting to make the most of the weekends now. Now it's socially acceptable to be out more, to social distance more, and to sort of put some deck chairs in a local park. So yeah, I'm coping okay. I've got plenty to keep me busy. This podcast for one, and having conversations with people on Zoom. So yeah, I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
Yeah, it's been. I mean, I'm lucky. Lucky enough to be living in a sort of fairly rural part of North Essex. So we have shops just down the road, local shops just down the road. My husband's a gardener, so the garden's lovely. I think it would be churlish to say that I haven't been enjoying some aspects of that. I'm certainly not missing commuting. I was traveling about 4 hours a day. So I'm not missing that at all. But it does make me think, what would this be like for the, single parent living on the 17th floor of a flat, who doesn't have those luxuries? Must be tough.
Yeah, it's not easy in those situations. We're in a first floor 2-bed flat with one living room. So yeah, we can get on top of each other and we don't see a lot of the outside. There's not a lot out there apart from a road. So yeah, we do need to get out a bit. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of people out there who are either living alone, who've been very isolated, or as you say, a single parent, or even worse, in some respects, a different problem where there's multiple generations living in the same household, all trying to compete for space, internet, computers, tabletops, which can be equally stressful.
Yeah, I think it can throw people together into emotional soups that they might not have either wanted to find themselves in, or they may have had other releases for. And actually as well, for some queer people, particularly tough times. If you're stuck with if you're stuck in a hostile environment, if you're stuck in an environment where you can't be yourself, and there's no way of actually going out to the places where you can be yourself, if you're in the closet, it must be very tough for. I think there are particular challenges, I think, for many LGBTQ plus people.
So I think we're starting by saying that the Pride Month's cancelled. So this was obviously a global celebration month for people. All the marches, all the Pride events have now been virtualized. It's hard to imagine some of them taking place over Zoom until Eurovision. I really had an amazing night watching the Eurovision Revisited, the online version, the way that the production company still put an event on in a different way. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought they missed a trick, though. They could have still done the voting. They could have played all the songs and still had the voting. We could have all joined in still.
I didn't see it, and I sometimes wonder if I'm not gay enough.
I didn't realise there was a sliding scale. I didn't realise you could be a bit gay.
Oh yeah. They're very, very definitely.
So you're right. It's impacting on people, and just the fact that they can't get out, they can't meet people, they can't be themselves. I'm hyper aware of the impact on people who maybe have the gender identity, the trans or non-binary, where they live in a family environment or with people who they're not open with, they're not out, and that could be a real challenge. There's no way they can sort of get any respite in that situation, maybe unless they're Zooming, even though that's difficult. I know some trans people who are out at work, but not out or not fully out at home, or that they're not out with their kids, or they're living in a marriage where it's not acceptable to be themselves. So work is their respite, and now they have to do Zoom calls in an environment where they don't want to go back to their birth gender for a Zoom call to work, but then they can't fully express themselves when they're in a household with other people. So it's a real dilemma for certain people.
Yeah, it must be. I mean, and I think this also goes to show, like, where, why the workplace for many people is such an important place. And I often shy away from this kind of use of the word authentic, which kind of I think gets perhaps overused in a corporate setting. But that said, where cultures within companies can be made to be inclusive, and I'm not talking about diversity in the sense of headcounts and making sure that we've tick got one of them. I'm talking about how do you make the workplace somewhere that actually you can feel celebrated in and accepted in, and that you can bring your best professional self to work in, without worrying about too much of that other baggage. And there's not enough companies that are like that, though.
Are we getting better? It's obviously still a long way to go, but is it better than it was?
I mean, it's certainly, I would say, I mean, obviously I don't want to speak for I certainly can't speak for trans people. Certainly as a gay man, seems better to me. But, if we're talking about, where a white middle-class gay man sits on that privilege ladder within the sets of communities, then it's possible that I'm not getting the best view for other people.
I suppose my experience is it's variable. It's situational. It's there are pockets of issues, but there are large swathes of places that are fully accepting. I spend most of my time in the world being embraced for who I am. It could well be that I've got my blinkers on and my hearing aid turned down, so I don't hear the negativity. But I don't experience much of an issue these days. But then again, I'm white. I'm relatively privileged, and I live in a world that is quite comfortable. So yeah, maybe I'm not the best judge.
Yeah, and it comes back to it's funny. I always sort of think about the William Gibson quote, which is the future's here. It's just not very evenly distributed. And and I think that's true. Obviously, the experience of somebody who is black and trans, or sort of genderqueer in some other way, or is going to be very different than for somebody who looks like me. And it's also going to be different if in the sort of company that you're working in. You're working in a big corporate that's got policies kind of within an inch of their lives, or are you talking about people who are working in SMEs that are maybe led by one entrepreneur who may have opinions that haven't been filtered through an HR department?
That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah. Shooting from the hip.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. Quite.
Yeah. There's the unfiltered politician speak, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
from over the water.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. But that's true. I think you're right. I think companies who are multinationals, big corporates, tend to have great policies, great HR teams, great inclusion strategies, employee networks, staff groups that cover all different intersections of diversity. But yeah, I think in the small business community, they either get it or they don't. There's a real challenge there. It's often hand to mouth, watching the bottom line. They're probably quite sexist still, not let alone homophobic or transphobic or biphobic. Yeah, they're still struggling with the basics around gender.
Well, and let's face it, most of us have had a crap boss at some point that is, creates toxic environments, and that's a very tough place to be if you're just trying. You're going to work to keep the wolf from the door, food on the table, and a roof over your head, and not necessarily going to work to change the world.
Yeah, you're right. I think the world is moving slowly, though. The world is moving slowly, but it's moving. I think as each generation passes, each year passes, we're making progress. Maybe not enough progress for a lot of people, but we are making. I don't think we're going backwards yet. So let's see where we come. Well,
it's funny though, because the way I kind of often think about this is that when I think about when I was a teenager, and in theory could have been arrested for holding somebody's hands in public, another man's hands in public, if somebody had complained and had reported that could have been reported as a breach of the peace. Let alone the fact that, when I was 17 and I was living with my first boyfriend who was 19, who was 20, sorry, he wasn't 19. I was 19, he was 23. And at that time, he could have spent 7 years in prison for the relationship that we had. Forward fast, to however many years it is. And, the idea that I can be married and live very comfortably in a rural village without anybody seemingly batting an eyelid is great. The trouble is that when things move quickly, they can also unravel quickly as well. And one of the political reasons with a little p that I felt it was so important to drive this museum project forward is to help lock down those gains. It's like, what could be my part in helping lock down those gains and make sure that we are kind of properly positioned as ourselves, embraced in the heart of the mainstream, without having to make those compromises about who we are.
Yeah.
And that's what I'd really like to see.
No, I agree. I think that's where we've got to try and move society forward. We've got to try, as you say, capitalize on what we've got, the progress we've made, make sure that we can't go backwards, because it only takes a different government, a different political bent, different priorities. I think we've seen that with the frustration around the trans, the gender reform, the GRA, Gender Recognition Act consultation was put out. It was a priority for Theresa May's government. We had a number of equalities ministers championing it, speaking for it. The Labour leader spoke for it. And now it's being kicked into the long grass. And whether that'll ever come back again, who knows? Whether it's going to be something that will never happen, what might happen, it's really, really, really it's really difficult to say. And of course, for many non-binary people and trans people who are not going through what was traditionally a medicalized process, they feel very vulnerable that they're not going to get acceptance. There's gatekeeping. There's talk about rolling back access for child services in terms of young people's trans access to the gender identity services. So that's all quite worrying, and it's giving oxygen to radical groups who are very small in number but very loud, and they have the ear of quite a few editors in big tabloids and broadsheets.
Well, Sorry, go after you.
As I say, you see a lot of Sunday papers printing kind of the negative trans stories about people detransitioning, about medical issues, about people who, about one child who sued their school for allowing gender-neutral toilets, and these things hit the national papers. They get promoted, and I spoke with the deputy social affairs editor for one of those papers recently. And he was telling me that they get hit with dozens or so stories every week from these vocal groups, all these negative stories. And I said, well, why can't you print something that I want to talk about? And he said, well, tell me a story that's interesting. But getting on with your life, being happy, being a functional member of society isn't interesting. It's only interesting if something it creates a reaction. So I have to do something that was against my nature to be interesting. Whereas all other people seem to be doing is finding people who have had a bad experience and amplifying that. Yeah. Whereas the thousands and thousands of people who don't have a bad experience suddenly have no voice. And the only voices you're hearing are the people with problems.
And isn't that true as well? Where totally true when you talk about actually people don't want to be the subject of debate. They just sort of want to get on with their lives. And I think a lot of the rhetoric around trans people now in the media actually very strongly echo how gay men were being talked about sort of 30 years ago. It's quite interesting and salutary to see how history you can read history to make sense of what's happening now. And actually, if you look at how, say, gay men and lesbians were spoken about all that time ago, what are the similarities and the correlations between that and the way that trans people are talked about now in those settings?
I mean, similar messages. Disbelieving it's real. We can fix you. You don't have to do this. You don't know you're just a phase. You don't know your own mind, or that's not normal. That's not the biology. The world wasn't designed for people to be anything other than men being men and women being women, and a marriage is a relationship between two people of different sexes or genders. And we're hearing the same stuff again. And it's to say that people don't know their own mind. They don't have this lived experience. And then demonizing people as being predatory when there's such a minority of cases where a predatory person uses the fact to say they're trans to to be predatory is such a rare occurrence. I mean, why add the stigma of same as trans?
Is it even a rare occurrence? I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? Isn't it that when those stories tend to be looked at, they're unsupported, anecdotal stories that have been really used to just sort of whisk up some fear. They've been quite often put out by somebody from the Christian right. And I do mean that in a very, and when I talk about the Christian right there, I mean that in a very specific way. I talk about those people who would use the Bible to deny basic human rights. And it's also that kind of, isn't it just a bit boring? And like, how long can you describe people using terms around the shock of the new? How long can you, how often can you have headlines about this, outrageous new trans trend?
Yes, I know.
It's such nonsense. And you can't say that same thing again and again and again and it be true.
But we see well-meaning schools, well-meaning government, local government, all trying to do what they think is the right thing.
Yeah.
Suddenly facing lawsuits, facing people who are anti-trans for whatever reason, trying to unpick the Equality Act and reword it to suit their own objectives. And basically just make stuff up that around it. And then because everyone's so risk adverse, they think that the status quo is the default option rather than saying, well, actually, the status quo is no longer the default option. Trans people have had change. They've had access to services. They've had access to live. And now they're finding those protections roll back because everyone's too scared it's going too quickly.
And haven't been, and aren't trans people just about, excuse me, that's my mother phone. Oh.
She can join in.
Well, that's my mother on the phone. Oh, I've just lost her. Oh, I'm gonna.
Hi, Mum.
Hello, Mum. You're on a podcast at the moment.
I'm what?
You're on I'm being interviewed for a pod. We're having a conversation for a podcast at the moment.
Oh my God. Sorry.
That's my mum. Say hello to Joe.
Hello.
Hi, Mum.
That's my mum. There you go.
Bye.
Call you later. Bye-bye.
Well, that's the new norm, isn't it? We have to bring our whole family to work at the moment. So,
right, that has stopped my voice memo, so I'm going to start that again. Right, okay. Where were we?
I think we're just talking about the rights of certainly trans people being kind of questioned and erased in some respect by people who are risk adverse, and the loud, vocal kind of, as you described them, the Christian right.
Well, I wonder as well if, because part of the culture wars, where a few years ago we had the Defence of the Marriage Act in the States that was defining marriages between one man and one woman. In a way, that became a proxy for a different sort of culture war, for the culture wars, and it feels like as the argument for same-sex marriage has been largely won for now, it's moving into where is the next frontier that they can use to probe and try and kind of break down coalitions that can exist between trans people, lesbians, gay people. How can feminism be used as a way of clawing people apart from each other, as opposed to doing the thing that it really should be doing, which is about bringing everybody together as equals.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting that Ruth Hunt was speaking in the House of Lords the other day around her support for trans equality, and whilst not everybody loved her or in her role at Stonewall, she did certainly advance the focus of Stonewall to look at trans rights and bring it to focus at Stonewall.
Way overdue.
Yeah. I mean, we could debate whether she was effective at that, whether it was authentic, but at the end of the day, Stonewall now have a trans positive element, and they do a lot of trans awareness training to organisations which love them or hate them. They're doing a fantastic job at doing something. And I think
great.
doing something.
I'm so glad that they are. I'm so glad that they are. Yes, it needs to happen, and actually, I think anything that can keep the L, the G, the B, the T, the Q closer together means that we'll be stronger.
Or just come together as Q. It's kind of
yeah. Well, I mean, the wonderful thing about that is that people, what I really love is if people can, people could just be whoever you are, be whoever you want to be.
Yes, because it doesn't really matter, does it? As long as you come from a position of kindness, then you just want to get on with your life. People don't generally want to be bad people.
And actually, this is one of the interesting things through history is that by and large, people have kind of got on with their lives, and they've worked their way round the systems as much as they can, and this is no different.
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching the news. I'm sure you are following what's going on in America at the moment. About some of the rhetoric coming out of the White House, some of the statements, but there's the upswell of support around the globe for to call out racism, to being vocal, being an ally. But it does still show that no matter how far we think we've come, racism is still prevalent in most societies in the Western world. It's just below the surface. Homophobia, biphobia, transphobia are just below the surface. And I think if you amplify those supremacy type voices, then it doesn't take much for these views to surface in clusters here and there. And I think, we've got to be careful.
Isn't it about the ruthlessness of the urge to power, which when you get a particular kind of, say, character like Trump, for example, and I'm not saying, I think Trump is a symptom. He's not the sole problem, but when that sort of power is trying to establish and preserve itself, or is trying to preserve itself, it doesn't really care who it throws under the bus in order to protect its own position. And actually divide and conquer. Well, it's a classic tactic, isn't it? And I imagine as well that for a lot of Black people in the States and in the UK, probably what they're going to be, I would imagine that they're going to be not surprised to see the films that have really disturbed other people, have disturbed actually lots of white people, because I think probably what they're going to be saying is, this is what we experience as Black people all the time. This is why Black kids are so often taught by their parents how to not attract the attention of police as they're walking out in the street. This is why people are worried when they go out jogging in nice neighborhoods. Nice meaning white and wealthy.
Yes, that perception, a Black person out for a run with a hoodie on is likely to be there for nefarious purposes rather than be there just to go for a run.
Yeah, true. Completely true.
It's something I don't experience, even as a trans person. I don't perceive that people perceive me as a threat and a criminal in that way. They may perceive me in other ways.
Well, they clearly don't know you.
Shh. But no, I've never experienced that kind of guilt by perception type. I've like yourself. I've experienced discrimination in employment, in opportunity, but never being judged as a criminal without cause, or some of the impact that racism has on people. So I've never experienced that, and I can only have so much. I can only have a little bit of empathy because I can't understand the full impact of it. I know what I feel about having to cover, having to pass, having to maybe, because my voice is quite deep, I'm cautious about how I speak in certain company. If I'm on the train, I'm conscious about if I shout out for a cup of coffee, it could cause some sort of kind of confusion amongst the people around me. So I'm very cautious about it. But that's nothing compared with a black youth just being themselves, if you like.
Well, how does that make you feel? I mean, what does that do to you on an emotional level or an intellectual level? I feel on an emotional level.
Well, I suppose what I'm doing is I'm trying to protect myself from having a further situation. So it's better to control myself, to maybe whisper or not to ask for a cup of coffee, or if I'm out with my wife, sometimes I say, can you go and have that conversation, please? Because I really can't be doing with having to out myself effectively to the waiter or to the person serving or to someone who we're trying to get some help from. I think it's just easier if you go and speak to them, because I don't really want to bring me into the equation. So I've kind of got used to that. But you're right, it's holding back. I'm not bringing my whole self to the world. I'm bringing my whole self to society. So yeah, it does impact. And my wife and I are conscious about holding hands, kissing in public, like many queer people do, which I find really confusing because she doesn't look any different to me. So maybe a bit older and a bit more gorgeous, but yeah, she's matured well.
Isn't it funny though how a kiss between partners can be politicized?
Yeah. I mean, we used to go to a lot of National Trust walks, do a lot of National Trust houses, and we would find cubby holes behind doors or behind a curtain somewhere, and we'd have a quick snog. I feel like we were really devilish because we were being kind of naughty behind the cupboard sort of thing, as grown adults, but we just didn't feel brave enough or open enough to be able to sort of just show public signs of affection, hold hands, walking around a National Trust building.
Well, I had a funny moment, and my experience is, because it's very gentle, I think, compared with what many people have to experience. But I found myself actually only about 5 or 6 years ago, and I was in a local shop near where we just moved into, the house that we just moved into, and went to buy a bottle of wine, and the woman serving, nice as pie. Oh, your wife will be pleased with that. Obviously, I'm wearing a wedding ring. And I had almost like a weird out-of-body experience where the thought process went, well, first of all, I blushed because I thought, well, I can't just let that pass, because somehow that feels like that's letting my lovely husband down and not kind of respecting that relationship that I have with him. And then there's the conflict of not wanting to be antsy or awkward or, rude. And then the next thought, thinking, oh my God, I used to, I'm as out as it's possible to be. Yeah, you Google my name, it is gay out there. So you can't get away. There's no going back into the closet for me, thankfully. Not that I'd want to, but I just thought, yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. But I also just thought, if that is how I felt, former editor of Gay Times, somebody who's been very well supported by his mother, who you just met. Somebody who has, is in his, at the time in his early 40s and, has been there, done that. what is it going to be like for somebody who is not so sure of themselves? What is it going to be like for that person who is like a young person who hasn't yet come out of the closet, or is struggling to come out of the closet, or is struggling with their identity issues? And I don't know, I just felt in that moment, it was like, well, I have to say something, because for that person, I can't leave that unsaid. And so just actually very kind of politely, it was just like, oh, husband actually is, and of course, nothing more was said. It was just like, oh, well, enjoy your wine, and obviously because these situations we're kind of almost trained to think that these things are going to be much bigger than they will be in the moment. But God, it's complicated, that whole series of thoughts that you can go through.
I was at my wife's Christmas party with her office colleagues, and she started introducing me as her other half. And I sort of laughed at her, because I just used to introduce her as my other half in the distant past, and she kind of didn't get upset with me, but she kind of went, "Oh, other half, a bit on the side. It sounds a bit, I'm your wife," sort of thing. And then to hear her introduce me as her other half, I sort of said, "Well," and she said, "Well, I thought about it." She said, "Well, because you're not my wife, because technically and legally, I'm still a husband. I haven't changed that role really. I don't identify as wife in that way, and to call me husband when I was in a cocktail dress didn't sound right either." So, and partner didn't quite work either. So we kind of fell back to other half as being kind of a nondescript of we're together, and everyone knew she was married to me, but to describe me as it was just a very neutral way of describing me to people who knew we were married. It was, but yeah, you got to double think these things, haven't you? It's no longer can you just go through life just using everyday language that other straight, normal, typical people use. We have to sort of
normal.
I know.
Is it interesting?
Whatever normal is, but yeah, whatever the sort of the societal norms, whatever people use who have never questioned any part of their identity, they just do. They don't think about what they do. Yeah. Having to double think everything, having to work out the risk, the reward, the impact. Am I going to come across as pedantic? Am I going to come across as, really another gay person trying to make trouble, or trying to, So you almost like have to think about the impact of what you say back, don't you? And every time I'm misgendered, do I make a big deal of it or don't I? When I talk about my wife, do I say partner? If I'm talking on the phone to somebody, my partner will be down soon. Do I say wife? Sometimes I just use language that just makes it easier for me not to have to explain it. And I think that's probably what you're saying there as well.
Yeah. And I mean, do you ever feel like you kind of also trip up on those things for other people? Is there any anxiety around getting the language right? And
doing it deliberately for other people?
Well, not deliberately, but the kind of accidental, say around misgendering, for example.
I misgender people occasionally. I misgender myself sometimes. I've described myself as the eldest of three brothers before. I ended up correcting myself and saying, well, actually, I'm the eldest of three children, or the eldest of three siblings. So, yeah, I've corrected the language on myself. I sometimes refer to myself in the third party sometimes, and I sometimes misgender myself historically. But no, I slipped up with people before. Someone was telling me about they were going to be a grandparent. I said, it must be really great to be a granddad. And I thought, actually, that's just misgendered you, haven't I? I haven't actually asked you how you want to identify in relation to that child.
I suppose it's that building. It's the I've built assumptions in without letting you tell me what it is that you want.
How do I describe myself in relation to my brother's children? Am I an uncle? Am I an auntie? Am I what's the sort of the non-gendered term? I know a niece and a nephew. The non-gender terms are nibbling. I'm not sure what the reverse.
Nibbling. I've never heard that
nibbling.
before.
Apparently, it's a nibbling is a non-gendered brother or sister of a parent. But I'm not sure what the reverse is. Whether of an aunt or an uncle, the non-gender version of that is. So I don't
nibbling.
know.
I like that. I like nibbling.
Nibbling. Yeah. So yeah, it's language, the constructs. I guess we're all working around them, aren't we?
I think. Yeah. I mean, yes. Yeah. Very, very much. And actually, it's funny. We're. It's interesting how. I mean, obviously, where we're at now with this pandemic, with sort of everything that's going on, we're about to launch a piece of, we're in the process of launching a piece of research that we're doing with Goldsmiths and Kent State University in Ohio, which is going to be a research project that's going to look at not only experiences in queer people's experiences across the UK in pandemic, but it's also going to be looking at that question as to sort of how do these kind of times affect senses of identity. This is a little bit of a sideways kind of thought from what we were talking about, but I wonder how identities are going to change as we come out the other side of this.
Yeah, I often have a similar thought when I think about the Robinson Crusoe kind of scenario. Mm-hmm. If I was alone on a desert island, who would I be? Or how would I be, or what would I be? I guess I would re-identify as a survivor primarily, and as a human being trying to survive. So I think identity is relative to your scenario, surroundings, and when we're in lockdown, we're kind of almost like in a smaller bubble. So our identity is more limited. We don't have to. We're not expressing it to anybody. We're not being it to anybody. We're not who we are with anybody else. We're just within our own heads. So how do we maintain that identity when no one can see us, no one can hear us, no one can feel us?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we have all got multiple identities in different times and with different people. Different parts of those come to the front. So you're husband, son, bad guitar player, shoddy singer, someone who's trying to set up a museum, nephew, bloke who likes a bit of banter in the shops on a Saturday morning, any neighbour. All of these things are different kinds of identities, which all in the round make us who we are. But I mean, even the funny thing is when you think about a name, I mean, these are all social constructs as well, because, you're not, I'm not Joe. You're not Joe. That's just a label that's been stuck on you at birth. That's not nothing intrinsic about who you are. We're just this collection of atoms that are here assembled in this particular way at this particular moment in time. If that's not too esoteric.
Yeah, we could just be 7 of 9, couldn't we?
Yes.
Just defined by where we live or where we sit.
Exactly.
Third person from the right.
Yeah.
It is. I guess. Yeah, it's just a way of. A way of controlling, policing, organising, helping us fit, identify each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's probably less devaluing than describing a feature of you. If you have a name, it doesn't become, is that Joe with the glasses? Well, which Joe with the glasses? Joe with the glasses and the long hair. No, it's Joe Lockwood sort of thing. So we create a name and a label that isn't relative to how we look or where we're from, I suppose.
Yeah. And I guess, at the end of the day, how do we just allow ourselves to be ourselves?
And that sounds like a great moment to ask you kind of where's the world going from now then? Where's what's your predictions for the lockdown and the communities and
Well, I wouldn't dream of making predictions. I mean, I certainly would have hopes. I hope that this is one of those moments, and including actually, so it's all interconnected. What's happening in the States at the moment, the pandemic, and I would hope that out of this we'll emerge with a greater sense of community, better sense of values about what's important and what's just G-jaws. I mean, I wouldn't dream of predicting. What do you think? Where do you think we're going?
I oscillate between hope that we won't go backwards, and that we'll learn a lot from this. But then I see what's going on the beaches. I see what people are doing the moment they're allowed to go out, allowed to unlock. Old behaviours are coming back very quickly. The anti-government rhetoric's starting up again. The politicalness is starting up again. The division is starting up again. So I'm not sure we'll learn all the lessons. Will we see this as a sad time, a happy time, or a time for learning? I don't know. I'd like to see where we are now as a time for learning, the great social experiment, and hopefully we'll take stuff from this and learn from it. And
it's all of those things, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all of those things.
So, too many people have lost things for everyone to be happy. So I think we have to find a way of helping the people who've lost a lot, but also allowing those people to recognise what they have gained. I think we've gained a lot. People are speaking to people they've never spoken to before, or haven't spoken to in a long time. They're spending more time with their families. The children are spending more time with their parents. We're commuting less. Pollution's down. So there's a whole lot of stuff we can take from it, and let's hope we keep the good stuff and chuck the bad stuff out with the bathwater, not the baby.
as I guess an anxious optimist, I'd say that I really do hope that I think it's really important that in however tough times are, we've got to kind of like make sure that positives can be taken out of them. And I really hope that that's the case now. Obviously, I'm anxious about straitened times. I'm anxious about the things that people have lost. I'm anxious about all of those things. But I'm also hopeful that greater community can come out of this.
Well, many thanks, Joe. I'm sure you'll all agree there's much there to ponder and take inspiration from. So how can our listeners get in touch with you?
If you go to www.queerbritain.org.uk, that's a website for the charity or for the museum, or you can drop me a line to hello@queerbritain.org.uk, and comments, thoughts, ideas. How can we help? All welcome.
Fantastic. Well, a huge thanks to everyone today for tuning in and listening. Please do subscribe to keep updated on future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES. Please tell your friends and colleagues. I have a number of exciting guests lined up, and I'm sure you'll be inspired by over the next few weeks and months. If you'd like to be a guest, please let me know. I would welcome any feedback and suggestions to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk for the future shows and how we can improve. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and it's been a pleasure to host this podcast for you today. Catch you next time. Bye.